Morning. Thank you for that introduction. It is my pleasure to be here today as I think back to my law school days and to speak to all of you, prospective lawyers, as well as fellow members of the bar. As you heard, I currently serve as the president and the CEO of the Global Black Economic Forum, which is a sister company to Essence. All of you may have heard of Essence, the legacy media brand. We work to advance the economic interests of the Black diaspora and other marginalized groups. And we do that through global summits, workplace training, leadership development, policy advocacy, litigation, and thought leadership. Through our work, we help to mobilize collective action to threats against both economic and social justice. And our work in this specific moment is more important now than ever. We are facing an existential moment in our nation's history, where some in positions of power are seeking to reinterpret our rules, our norms, and dare I say it, our laws, to the detriment of the underprivileged and marginalized communities. We're seeing a recalibration of social norms to ultimately restructure and reshape how we see ourselves and the rules and the regulations that actually govern us. And in this moment, I think we're all being asked a rhetorical question. What role do you want to play? I became a lawyer more than 25 years ago with the purpose of utilizing the law for good. I was born in the United States, but I was raised in Liberia, West Africa. Spent 14 years of my life there. The law was the furthest thing from my mind as a young child. My father was the mayor of Monrovia, the capital city of Liberia. My uncle was the president of Liberia. I was surrounded by politics, but I was intrigued with medicine. I loved playing doctor when I was a child, and I thought that saving lives through medicine was my calling. That all shifted on one fateful night in 1980. I was a 10-year-old child, and rebel soldiers came to our house and they started shooting. We had to escape through a bathroom window and flee our home through the bushes. They eventually tracked us down, arrested my father, put him in prison, tortured him, and then placed us under house arrest. We also learned that my uncle, the president of Liberia, had been assassinated in a military coup of the government. My life shifted in a moment, in a heartbeat, and we were no longer free. Members of my family were being systematically hunted down because of our political affiliations and our associations. And I had to watch people being killed, women being attacked and assaulted, and people consciously adopting fear over freedom. It was this experience that shifted my focus from medicine to the law. I saw how well-established rules, norms, and laws can be subverted in a heartbeat, and how we take them for granted when we have them. I started reading everything from novels about the law to legal cases, and during that exploration, it became very clear to me that the law and the societal norms that we live in are not permanent. We have to fight for them, or they will change. I read case after case where the law has been used to oppress unpopular groups and groups who find themselves in the minority. We have general principles of equality and fairness and justice for all, but those rules have not been applied equally. In fact, we can trace the unequal application back more than 400 years, when black people were considered chattel, effectively treated as property, unable to earn a living, unable to get an education, unable to enter into a valid contract, and so on and so on. And so, I took the baton 25 years ago to fight for those who often don't have voices at the table. And I've had the privilege to work in all sectors, the public sector, the private sector, the not-for-profit sector. I started out clerking for a federal judge. I then worked at a major law firm. I worked as a corporate counsel for a company in California. I then entered the not-for-profit space as a litigator, a civil rights litigator. Entered government. As you heard, I spent 12 years in government at the Attorney General's office. Became the first black man to serve as chief counsel to the governor of New York. Ran the Human Rights Campaign, and now I serve as the president of the Global Black Economic Forum. And throughout these 25 years, it has been a constant forge, a battle of wills, of determination, and creativity. I had to constantly fight systems that were seeking to maintain the status quo, to further oppress people of color. And I had the privilege of working on some very important and some would say groundbreaking cases and initiatives. I filed the first marriage equality lawsuit here in New York. I had the privilege of writing the marriage equality law here in New York. I had the privilege of drafting raise the age legislation which changed criminal liability for people who are 16 or 17 years old. I worked on legislation to enact paid family leave in New York. And now you can take care of your family and be paid if they're dying or someone is sick. I worked on removing barriers for minority and women-owned businesses, increasing contracting opportunities from 9% to 30%. And as we can think about all of these successes and pat ourselves on the back, we have to realize that if we do not fight to sustain these successes, if we do not socialize the importance of this work and stress how they benefit not just some of us, but all of us, they will be rolled back. The urgency of this moment that we currently live in, the opportunity that it provides to us, and the implications and the consequences of engagement or disengagement, we all have to confront. As we all know, we just went through a consequential election. In fact, across the world, more people voted this year than any other year in human history. From India to Mexico, from Nigeria to Russia, from Brazil to the United Kingdom, and of course here in the United States. And as we analyze the results of this year's election, and I know we have a lot of feelings about it, the most pressing question we must ask ourselves is not about our ideological affiliations. It's not about whether or not you're Democrat, Independent, or Republican. The question is, what is your risk tolerance? That question transcends the traditional partisan lens through which we typically think about our voting choices and analyze the outcomes. It is about understanding what are we willing to risk by taking action or choosing inaction. It's about the courage to engage and the consequences of staying on the sidelines. And in the context of understanding and informing our risk tolerance, I want to first contextualize the urgency of this moment so we take it out of concept and we make it real. From the classroom to the courtroom, there is a coordinated, very well-funded effort to influence American political and cultural landscapes that I would submit to you threatens our democracy, threatens our livelihood, and threatens our progress. This is not theory. This is very real. There is an effort to shape public opinion by framing social justice and economic opportunity for people of color within a discourse of opposing government outreach, alleged indoctrination, and erosion of, quote, traditional values. We have seen this manifest itself in legislation that bans our ability to talk about Black history in schools. We've seen this in lawsuits that attempt to undermine progress and reshape the landscape of opportunities in academia, in business, as well as in culture. We have seen this effort result in overturning decades of case law that we have relied on. As an example, the United States Supreme Court recently eradicated 50 years of federal jurisprudence that protected the right of women to control their own bodies. 50 years. Let's remember, things can change. And this change in law most disproportionately affects women of color, who in most cases have less access to resources. This was seen as the obvious risk of Roe versus Wade, of overturning it. But now we see it. We see it play out in the health outcomes of women of color all over this country. Another example is a broader assault that hits close home to me. And that was the targeting of the Fearless Fund. It's a venture capital firm, a charitable organization that's dedicated to supporting Black women entrepreneurs and other women of color. I was proud to represent them in court, in federal court, this past year, alongside a team of lawyers, including at the law firm Gibson Dunn. The Fearless Fund came under fire by right-wing extremists who challenged their mission to address disparities in funding for business led by women of color. Let me break that down for you. There's $288 billion that's allocated every year in the venture capital space. What do I mean by that? I own a business. I want to grow that business. I want to scale that business. I need investors. I go out to find investors. There's $288 billion being allocated in that space every year. Less than 1% goes to Black people. 0.036% goes to Black women. So the Fearless Fund opened up their doors to address that disparity. And 5 years later, they found themselves in federal court. They were sued by 3 anonymous plaintiffs who said that they were not Black women. And they argued that a law that was passed in 1866 that was designed to provide us the right to enter into contracts, they argued that that law should prohibit the Fearless Fund from providing grants to Black women. Things can change. The lawsuit subjected them to a year of litigation, seeking to shut down their business. But we were successful in beating them back. We argued that as a charitable organization, they had a First Amendment right to issue grants consistent with their mission. They're no different than the Ford Foundation. And the district court agreed, but an appellate court disagreed. Elections have consequences. We ultimately settled that case to protect the Fearless Fund so that they can keep their doors open, so that they can continue to provide resources and support to the communities that need it the most. In fact, the Fearless Fund recently announced a $200 million debt fund to support under-resourced entrepreneurs, including Black and brown people. Now, this is a victory, but let's be clear that these cases are not popping up randomly and they're not going away. This is a highly coordinated campaign that seeks to shut down companies seeking to advance equity. This year alone, there have been more than 50 cases that have been filed in federal court since the affirmative action decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. And these cases are seeking to dismantle race-conscious programs and policies throughout the nation. The plaintiffs are aiming to dismantle programs that are designed to address representation gaps in various fields. They are alleging that when we try to engage in self-help, when we try to support our community, they allege that that is reverse discrimination. Things can change. So now that we understand the urgency of this moment, what are you going to do about it? Politics is often about who gets what, when, and how. And for Black people and other people of color, our existence by its very nature is political. Some people may think that disengaging is a way to remain neutral, to avoid the fray. You may have deduced that either political party will effectively support your business or your economic interest. And you may believe that the burden of engagement is too high for the rate of return. But let's be clear that disengagement is a form of engagement. Whether we like it or not, our decision to engage or disengage politically and socially has profound effects on our lives. Everyone in this room has something to lose. Back in the 50s and the 60s, it appeared that we were fighting on issues of life and death. Today, our risks may seem different, but they're just as existential, but potentially much greater. It's really about whether we can ever be free. Remember, we recently lost 50 years of jurisprudence. Remember, we just saw a statute that's been in the books for 150 years being challenged, saying that Black women can't support other Black women. Engagement or failure to engage will influence our freedoms. Our freedom to earn, our freedom to have safe housing, our freedom to live, and our freedom to do business. Engagement comes in many forms. My only plea to you is to engage. And I do hope you go to law school. From corporate law to civil rights, from labor to intellectual property. Now is the moment that we need you the most. Now is the moment that we will confront new and novel approaches to deconstruct our laws and our policies and our norms. One of the architects of the desegregation litigation strategy, a fellow civil rights attorney, Charles Hamilton Houston, once said, "A lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society." A social engineer is a highly skilled, perceptive, sensitive lawyer who understands the Constitution of the United States and knows how to explore its uses in bettering conditions for underprivileged citizens. I want to posit to you all that as privileged as we all are to be in this room, we are not that far from being underprivileged. Only if we coordinate our collective power and engage can we truly safeguard our future. So I will end where I began. How risk-averse are you? For our collective freedoms? I hope not at all. Thank you.